Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 11th of February 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
The last UK Column News, Brian.
This is the last UK Column News. For those of you that are thinking that's very sad, don't be, because it's the last UK Column News in this studio. And the next broadcast we do, which will be Tuesday next week, hopefully, we will be broadcasting from our new location. And we would like to say a very big thank you to all of you who have helped us make that move. And we're sure that you're going to enjoy the upgrade in productions that we're going to be able to produce from that new studio. Well, if things are looking good for the UK column, of course, the weather's also looking good. So at the moment, it's sunny across the country. A lot of people reporting blue sky, whatever that is, sunshine, and I think spirits are lifting a bit. Well, if the weather's improving, of course, the political climate isn't. And so that all of our viewers understand what is really important, here is local Plymouth Conservative MP Oliver Colville, who has been holding his Hedgehog Summit. This is real. This is tweeted out by this Conservative MP. He thinks at the moment, with everything going on, the collapse of the banks, the breakup of UK, the EU referendum, the abuse of children, the most important thing is hedgehogs and preserving them. Just so that you know, this is Oliver Colville, and of course the gentleman to his right, the other side of the lady in the white jacket, is none other than Conservative MP Florence of Arabia. This is the man who was at one time chair of the Defence Select Committee, but he's also now big on hedgehogs. We'll just add to this that abuse of children, who really cares about that? Hedgehogs is the thing if you're in the Tory party. Well, we say otherwise, and we're just going to begin our news today by pointing out that if you understand what child abuse is really about, you can start to unravel some of the events in UK and indeed international politics. So firstly, a very big thank you to the viewer who pointed this article out to us. It's from the Morning Star. It's by a gentleman called Stephen Walker. And he, back in November 2015, he was beginning to say that really there is a stench over the child abuse issue. It's obviously much bigger than is being admitted. And he was already then reporting that there was a cover-up going on. But he started this article by saying Judge Lowell Goddard, the head of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, has finally confirmed that there will be a separate inquiry into allegations that Westminster MPs were involved in the abuse of vulnerable children. So since then, of course, we've seen the investigation into paedophilia around politicians absolutely closed down. We know for a fact that London police officers, Metropolitan Police officers, have been threatened, bullied, intimidated, some of them to the point of suicide in order to get them to shut up about child abuse. But this gentleman saying back then that there was going to be a separate inquiry. So that was quite interesting. Well, in October, he was writing again. Here's the article, Crime But No Punishment. The BBC TV Panorama programme, the VIP paedophile ring What's the Truth, was broadcast, and of course it got criticised for that. But right at the end of this article was something of great interest. It was this, which I shall read. As well as delaying the findings of the national inquiry by Justice Goddard into historic child sexual abuse until after the 2020 general election, it has emerged that an inquiry under Justice McCurr to find out if there was a cover-up by the Waterhouse inquiry into sexual abuse by VIPs in North Wales children's homes has also been delayed. And there underneath it tells us, of course, that Stephen Walker is a UNICEF children's champion. So some astute comment here. We didn't actually pick up on this, but isn't that interesting when you think about it, Mike, that this has just been delayed to make sure it happens after the next election?
It's Interesting that that was written back in September, October last year. On Radio 4 last night, they were talking about the new police inquiry into their own handling of the Midland Operation Midland investigation, and they're saying that, of course, well, the question was asked: Is Operation Midland going to be shut down? And Bernard Hogan-Howe wouldn't say whether it was going to be shut down. He said, well, eventually it'll be shut down, because it'll come to some kind of conclusion. But he wouldn't say that it's going to be shut down at any time soon. But what he did say was that information regarding the police's handling of this business would not be sent to the Goddard inquiry until after Operation Midland is shut down. So that could be never, theoretically.
Right. Okay, so we've got a police investigating their own failures, and we may shut the inquiry down anyway, so there wouldn't have been any failure.
Yeah.
Right, so what is this all about? Let's see if we can really pull this about. Welcome to Britain's exclusive paedophile club. What is it all about? Well, let's remember that paedophiles prey on children for self-gratification, sexual pleasure, and we also need to remember that men and women are paedophiles roughly on a 50-50 basis. This is something that the mainstream press do not like to talk about. They only focus on the men. Well, the mainstream also largely says that paedophiles are dirty old men in raincoats. We've called them ordinary paedophiles. The other sort are the interesting ones, the high-level political and establishment paedophiles. So let's follow this through. The ordinary paedophiles tend to have normal jobs, and they can be in the public and private sectors. And what they want most of all is the sweetie shop jobs, which is anywhere with access to children. So the NHS, social services, children's charities, children's homes, and of course access to street children.
Don't forget the church.
The church, I should have put the church in, you're quite right, Mike. Street children, the isolated and vulnerable. And that brings us very nicely to recent reports that Britain is going to take in foreign immigrant and refugee children. And remember, of course, that behind everything we say, children are big money and profit for paedophile rings. So let's have a look at those high-level people. We're talking about politicians, lords, bankers, judiciary, barristers, the church, senior police, senior military. We mustn't forget the royal family, and of course the security services themselves have been implicated. Well, this is the golden rule, that when people are involved in the paedophile rings, there's a code of silence. It doesn't matter whether you're a judge or a road sweeper, you are going to protect each other's backs because you're in the club. Well, who else has been in the club? Well, unfortunately, it's MI5, MI6, and special branch officers and metropolitan police officers themselves. But these are the very people who are supposedly keeping an eye on those naughty, ordinary paedophiles. So what do the security services do? Well, their specific job is to monitor high-level establishment figures in government and military for national security. This is the so-called personal vetting procedure. But of course, what do they discover in their spying? They discover the dirty little secrets about people involved in paedophilia, the murder and abuse of children. And this information is used for blackmail and control. We know this is a fact because, of course, Mr. Tim Fortescue, the former Tory whip, is on BBC video saying that when Tory MPs came to them with problems over little boys, they sorted it out because those MPs would then do as they were told. Well, remember that the security services, of course, monitor all of those high-level political and establishment figures. So there's a nice little circle of activity going on there. So the high-level establishment paedophiles are people who've got huge power and wealth, both to procure children for their own activities, but these are the people who've got the power and influence to organise the cover-ups, including blocking, stopping reports, and the threats and intimidation of police officers and others working to stop the paedophile rings. And remember that, of course, those interested in dirty little secrets are going to use all the information to make sure that those people do their job to cover up paedophile activity. So out of the establishment, we should also point out, of course, anybody who resists this or whistleblowers are likely to be ruined as individuals, or they're going to be sectioned, mentally ill, or what dementia, of course, or they're going to be disposed of, euthanized, we're going to say. Out of the power elites, out of the establishment paedophiles, we have the group who are the elites. These are the people really with the power, and these are the people with the very power to control our intelligence services. And we just add at this point, of course, that high-level abuse inquiries will only be given to a safe pair of hands. So if we analyse the grid, what we've got to say is that MI6 and MI5 are both strongly implicated in the fact that not only are these paedophile rings in existence, but of course there's never any activity to break them apart. We just reinforce this because if you take a look at MI6's webpage, and I'd encourage you to do this, there is a really gross little video where they advertise themselves. The Houses of Parliament is part of it. It says, "We work overseas to help make the UK a safer and more prosperous place." That's pretty nice, Mike, isn't it? But of course, let's remember that apparently these people are incapable of finding and stopping paedophile rings, including those involved politicians and senior members of the establishment. And if that's MI6, well, have a look at MI5. They say the security service is responsible for protecting the United Kingdom against threats to national security. This website provides information about the security service, the threats it counters, links to sources of security advice, and details of careers with the service. But remember that MI5 are incapable of finding and stopping paedophile rings, including those involving politicians and senior members of the establishment. So to summarise, against a background of obvious paedophile activity at very high level, the blackmail, the cover-ups, the closing down of police investigations, this dirty little organisation must be at the heart of it because only it has sufficient power to monitor those paedophile rings and to keep stum when they know full well that politicians, lords, judges, senior military people are involved. Well, it's not organisations because these are the two men responsible, Andrew Parker, boss of MI5, and Alex Younger, who's the boss of MI6, paid vast amounts of money to protect Britain, but are incapable of finding and stopping paedophile rings. Remarkable, Mike, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I'm just going to remind everybody once again that Tim Farron, Liberal Democrat leader, is pushing and has been pushing for unaccompanied children to be brought from Syria to Britain in order that they are educated. I'm not sure what educated means in this case. I suspect in some cases it means trafficked. But anyway, it seems unfortunate, though, that unaccompanied children who do survive the process of being brought here and educated are then simply thrown out again as soon as they reach the age of 18. And RT here reporting this. Britain has returned more than 2,700 young asylum seekers to war-torn countries in the Middle East over the past 9 years. And what they're saying is that this is double the number that were understood to be the case. Basically, as soon as they hit 18, they're thrown out. And if they only arrived when they were 15 or 16, then they've only been here for 3 years. But if they've been here for longer than that, it may be that they actually have no ties in the country that they're being sent to. And they're quite often being sent to somewhere that is, in fact, a war zone. So, again, I'm going to ask Tim Farron, if thousands of unaccompanied children are brought here following his campaign, what's he going to do personally to make sure that they have a future, that they're protected, and that they're not simply thrown back into a war zone in a few years' time as soon as they reach the age of 18?
Well, of course, it would work extremely well if you brought the children to UK to be abused, and then once they'd effectively been used and abused, you don't want them to talk. So what you do is you ship them out the country again.
And hope they get killed in Aleppo or something
or
like that?
Or disappear in one of the war zones.
That's the concern, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, then, Philip Hammond held a meeting yesterday with Raed Hijab, who was the Prime Minister of Syria from June to August 2012. Hijab defected to the rebel side when he thought the writing was on the wall for Assad. So, again, I wonder what that makes him. But anyway, he now heads the Saudi-formed Syrian opposition's High Negotiations Committee, and this is part of one of the groups that has been in the negotiations recently for peace. So Hammond made a statement afterwards saying, in my meeting with Dr. Hijab, I reaffirmed my support for the Syrian opposition's Higher Negotiations Committee. We agreed on the need to bring an urgent end to the suffering in Syria for the regime and Russia to end attacks on civilians immediately and for full humanitarian access to be granted to besieged areas. There are more lies in that little statement than I could possibly comment on, but anyway, nonetheless, it's pretty similar language to the language of Brooks Newmark when he went off to meet General Idlib, of the Free Syrian Army. Idris. Sorry, yes, I do apologise. Back in 2013. Except for the new edition, which is a lie that Russia is targeting civilians, but we'll come on to that in a moment. Now, the UK will apparently train moderate opposition forces in Syria to help defend the country against Islamic State, and this is according to Michael Fallon, who's Defence Secretary.
Don't they mean Daesh?
Yeah, well,
I'm getting a bit confused here between the good and the bad terrorists again, Mike.
Indeed, it's difficult. So Fallon said, in Syria, coalition airstrikes have supported the liberation of Kobane and have disrupted ISIL's logistics and supply lines. Really? I thought that was Russia doing that, but anyway, I thought what Britain was doing was bombing key infrastructure.
No, they haven't, Mike, because there's been hardly any RAF missions. Cameron pushed and pushed to get the RAF on a mission. They did at 3 o'clock in the morning after the vote. They did a couple of missions and then they stopped because apparently there wasn't any targets.
Okay.
All the aircraft weren't flying. We're not sure.
Okay, so anyway, Fallon continued to lie by saying, however, defeating ISIL ultimately lies with the local forces and we are helping to create effective ground forces in Syria as well as in Iraq so that they can take the fight to ISIL. So what is actually going on here? They're basically sending 75 key personnel over to train the moderate terrorists so that they can fight back against Russia?
Yeah, I think this is what's going on. Of course, Russia completely outflanked David Cameron, UK and the USA. They're not brave enough to take on the Russians face to face. So what do? You need some proxy cannon fodder. So you're going to get in and train anybody you can in order to get that. This is what they did, of course, in Afghanistan when the Russians were in Afghanistan.
They went and trained the Mujahideen.
They went and trained, particularly in the use of IEDs, which were then used to destroy our own troops when we went in. So this is all policy we've seen before, devious, very callous, calculated stuff.
Right, and Sputnik here reporting once again that Western media has been lying basically about what's been going on. So they're saying Western media reveals old Aleppo wreckage and attributes it to Russian bombs. And I mean, the Western media would never do this, would they, Brian? The BBC has not been caught. They certainly didn't get caught. They didn't get caught putting old footage in their report on Madaya, for example, recently. If you want to see, I'm just going to remind people once again that if you want to see some evidence of how the BBC doesn't lie, please go along to this meeting in Frome, where Robert will give us the details on saving Syria's children, the Panorama documentary from 2013, where they basically lied.
Lied is the word, Mike. But of course, you're allowed to lie if you put out propaganda, because lying is part of the propaganda.
Indeed. And just an update on Robert Stewart's attempts to get some information from the BBC on this. Of course, he put in a Freedom of Information request to the BBC recently, which they rejected on the basis that the Freedom of Information does not cover them or editorial decisions that they make. He has appealed to the Information Commissioner on this, and we'll keep you posted on that, and hopefully we can give a little bit of support on that as well.
Yeah. Well, how about this? If you really want to understand the quality of your MPs, and I know this is a very busy graphic here, but I'm just going to pull part of it. This is part of a Hansard dialogue. I should have the date, I don't, but it's the real Hansard recording. And what was the subject? The subject was people asking penetrating questions about Conservative Party finances. So Mr. Hoyle said, if the honourable gentleman will allow me, I shall tell him what information is now given to us. We understand the expenditure and what Tory Central Office receives. In 1992, Central Office received 20.7 million. When we asked about that and about company donations, the Tory party told us to look at company accounts. I repeat, in 1992, the Tories received 20.7 million. When the records were checked by Companies House, only 2.9 million was shown in company accounts. That means there's a deficit of 17.8 million. We want to know where that 17.8 million came from. Well, here's the gentleman bravely asking the question, and then let's have a look at the quality of the responses. So, Mr. Ashby, is the honourable gentleman aware that this marvellous magazine Business Age is really the hello of business publications? It talked about Sarawak as a desert kingdom when it's in Borneo. Mr. Hoyle, that's a very useful piece of information which has added to my knowledge. Does the honourable gentleman now care to tell us, taking just 1992, where the almost 18 million that is unaccounted for came from? We know that the funding, and he was interrupted by this gentleman, Mr. Nigel Evans, who said, this is very boring. So I think this is a wonderful example of the sheer quality of British MPs. They're not interested in criminal activity. They're not interested in child abuse. It's all a bit boring. Presumably they'd rather be going and getting pissed, I think is the correct word, Mike, drunk in the Westminster bars. And why have we got MPs of this calibre? So that, of course, they will not get in the way of our journey into Europe.
I think it's cocaine is the main problem, isn't it?
Alcohol and cocaine, according to the national press. Yeah.
Okay, so Hilary Benn's been at it again, and he is making the case for the EU in a speech that he gave today at Chatham House. And I'm just going to quote some of the things that he said. Since it was founded almost a century ago, Chatham House has borne witness to and at times helped shape profound changes in our world. Today, I want to talk about why I believe that Britain's global influence is strengthened by our membership of the European Union. It promotes interdependence through trade, advances our economic security, works collectively to tackle conflict and other global challenges, and helps protect us from crime and terrorism. So Hilary Benn clearly not interested in any kind of independent nation state, any kind of independence or capability to be independent. We've got to be interdependent, which is absolutely the Sustainability Agenda 21 policy. So he's not a patriot, because he goes on then to say there's nothing patriotic about diminishing the United Kingdom's ability to make its voice heard by other nations, apparently. And then he said the EU currently has or is negotiating trade agreements with 90% of Commonwealth countries. So much for the argument that being in the EU prevents us from having better trade relations with the Commonwealth. Well, he can't have it both ways, because what he's saying here is that Commonwealth nations which aren't members of the EU are getting on very well, thank you very much, because 90% of Commonwealth countries are negotiating trade agreements with the EU. And then he goes on to say that Britain couldn't do that. I'm not quite sure how he can do that, but anyway. And then he says, then there are other voices supporting the Leave campaign, those who want to see the back of the kind of regulation that protects British workers from a race to the bottom. Just look at how Europe was able to coordinate its response to the Russian aggression in Crimea and Ukraine, and efforts towards the creation of an EU-wide energy union. So now we've got an EU army, an EU treasury, an EU foreign office, an EU energy department. So we're doing very well here. And then he goes on to say, let's be clear, President Putin would shed no tears if Britain left the European Union. He would see Brexit as a sign of our weakness and of the weakness of European solidarity at the very moment we all need to maintain our collective strength. and the collective effort to reduce the effects of piracy off the Horn of Africa through Operation Atlanta run from the EU Naval Force operational headquarters at Northwood in Middlesex, which has made a difference. I didn't realise Middlesex was a coastal county.
I'll have to think about that one, Mike.
Right. So anyway, we also have an EU Naval Force operational headquarters, so that's good. He goes on to slag Russia off somewhat more, and then he finishes by saying, "I've changed my view on Europe since 1975. I've been on a journey, not least because Britain has been on a journey too. We live in a changing world, and if you look at the future challenges we face, I believe the case for Europe is stronger now than ever." So, Hilary Benn, his father would have been proud.
Well, perhaps his father wasn't proud, but this is black is white, white is black, lies are truth. This is the same rhetoric and treason, a few people are saying, and I think I would agree with that.
Absolutely. And speaking of treason, constitutional reform. So this is Dr. Tim Oliver, who is from the London School of Economics. The UK needs a devolved government for London. He's saying Her Majesty's government, located in the Whitehall and Westminster districts of London, controls the UK to an extent found in few other places in the developed world. Really? Constitutional reform to devolve power has so far not solved the issue. If anything, the approach taken has added to the confusion that risks unravelling the union. So again, we're back into the rhetoric of split the union up in order to save the union, so that makes sense. Further reforms all have their problems, whether they are Devo Max to regions such as Scotland, devolution to areas such as Manchester, the creation of an English Parliament, English votes for English laws, or moving the UK government out of London altogether. Devolution to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland has been ad hoc with no real strategy behind it. Proposals such as Devo Manc, which is the Manchester devolution, don't add up to much, especially when it comes to financial muscle. Moving government out of London is prohibitively expensive. Create an English Parliament in London and you merely accentuate the centralisation problem. Build it outside London without granting London autonomy from it, and the English Parliament risks a fraught relationship with a metropolis that will likely try to ignore it. And so he goes on. But at the bottom of this, Brian, I believe that we have been talking about this for several years, the regionalisation of Britain, the splitting up of the Union, and the fact that London would become its own autonomous region, and that's exactly what's being called for here.
Yeah, region within the within the EU. Yeah, we've been talking about this for years.
Indeed, and just to back this up then, today we've had the publication of the 5th report of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee talking about exactly this issue, English votes for English laws. And they are basically saying that, well, they're pretty hostile to it, really. They're saying it isn't going to work on a long-term basis. It could end up as a short-term experiment. It's incompatible with the Barnett formula for distributing funds to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And they're saying that while there's a strong English demand for it, it would cause constitutional anomalies. It would do nothing to address the constitutional anomalies that devolution has brought. And it uses the term ad hoc to describe the devolution so far. And what they're basically calling for is a comprehensive strategy for forging a new settlement, as they describe it. So in other words, what they're saying is that the government has made a cock-up of constitutional reform. So far, they haven't done their job properly, and they need to get on with it.
To break up UK.
To break up the UK.
Yeah. Well, of course, the banks always in the background funding and rolling the process through.
Indeed. So this is Postbank, which is Deutsche Postbank. It's German bank. Obviously, it's owned by Deutsche Bank. We've been covering the fact that Deutsche Bank is practically on its knees at the moment. Recently, and now they've had to admit that actually Postbank wasn't quite as valuable as everybody thought it was. They're basically saying that it's another one that's in trouble. And as a result, Deutsche Bank's shares continue to fall, 35% down since the start of the year. And we've now got another one, SocGen, the French bank, now also in trouble. Shares falling because nobody believes that it's a viable bank either. And so more and more of these large banks clearly getting themselves into trouble, having to make statements that they're actually everything's all right. honest it is. Well, honestly, it isn't. And of course, banks driving the pretty significant collapse of the FTSE 100. And I believe you were speaking to somebody suffering a little from this. So people increasingly with investments in pension schemes and so on, really getting hammered by this collapse of the stock market.
Well, indeed, I was. A gentleman this morning talking to me about that and saying he was very concerned at the reports he was watching about the collapse of the banks. I can say, and it's quite truthful, he also said you were talking about this years ago, to which I said, yes, I was. And the other person we were speaking to recently, I will just say a gentleman called John, the carpet fitter, was telling us that in a recent trip to Italy, the southern part of Italy, things were very, very bad with unemployment, general breakdown in society. But one of the most interesting things was that apparently local people are very keen to use hard currency. They don't want to use the euro, but they're very keen to trade in other currencies, and including sterling, which was being taken and used.
So they're staying away from the banks completely?
Staying away from the banks, and particularly didn't want to go near the euro. We've also had some very interesting reports over the last few days of similar situation in Greece. Times very, very tough in Greece, and a lot of anger at the way Greece has been essentially betrayed to the European Union. But people starting to use alternative currencies there. So wherever we look at the EU project, we're seeing breakdown, we're seeing people suffering, we're seeing unemployment, migration, and above all, we're seeing utter lies and propaganda. And our politicians want to drag us in even deeper.
Well, it looks like sheer desperation. They're trying to get these institutions established before the whole lot comes down around their ears.
Right. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Short news today. We've got other things to do. We will be back on Tuesday from the new studios, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.